Hi again. Christianity and the Social Crisis, page 328. Rauschenbusch in the discussion of the class struggle back in 1907 in all the Western world and in Russia too. In its struggle, the working class becomes keenly conscious of the obstacles put in its way by the great institutions of society, the courts, the press, and the church. It demands not only impartiality, but the kind of sympathy which will condone its mistakes and discern the justice of its cause in spite of the excesses of its followers. When our sympathies are enlisted, we develop a vast faculty for making excuses. If two dogs fight, our own dog is rarely the aggressor. Stealing peaches is a boyish prank when our boy does it, but petty larceny when that dratted boy of our neighbor does it. If the other political party grafts, it's a flagrant shame. If our own party does it, we regret it politely or deny the fact. If Germany annexes a part of Africa, it is brutal aggression. If England does it, she fulfills her mission of civilization. If the business interests exclude the competition of foreign merchants by a protective tariff, it is a grand national policy. If the trades unions try to exclude the competition of non-union labor, it is a denial of the right to work or an outrage. The working class likes to get that kind of sympathy which will take a favorable view of its efforts and its mistakes, and a comprehension of the wrongs under which it suffers. Instead of that, the pulpit of late has given its most vigorous interest to the wrongs of those whom militant labor regards as traitors to its cause. It has been more concerned with the fact that some individuals were barred from a job by the unions than with the fact that the entire wage working class is debarred from the land, from the tools of production, and from their fair share in the proceeds of production. It cannot well be denied that there is an increasing alienation between the working class and the churches. That alienation is most complete wherever our industrial development has advanced farthest and has created a distinct class of wage workers. Several causes have contributed. Many have dropped away because they cannot afford to take their share in the expensive maintenance of a church in a large city. Others because the tone, the spirit, the point of view in the churches is that of another social class. The commercial and professional classes dominate the spiritual atmosphere in the large city churches. As the working men grow more class conscious, they come to regard the businessmen as their antagonists and the possessing classes as exploiters who live on their labor. And they resent it when persons belonging to these classes address them with the tone of moral superiority. When ministers handle the labor question, they often seem to the working class partial against them, even when the ministers think they are most impartial. Foreign working men bring with them the long-standing distrust for the clergy and the church as tools of oppression, which they have learned abroad, and they perpetuate that attitude here. The churches of America suffer for the sins of the churches abroad. The scientific socialism imported from older countries through its literature and its advocates is saturated with materialistic philosophy and is apt to create dislike and antagonism for the ideas and institutions of religion. Thus, in spite of the favorable equipment of the church in America, there is imminent danger that the working people will pass from indifference to hostility, from religious enthusiasm to anti-religious bitterness. That would be one of the most unspeakable calamities that could come upon the church. If we would only take warning by the fate of the churches in Europe, we might avert the desolation that threatens us. We may well be glad that in nearly every city there are a few ministers who are known as the outspoken friends of labor. Their fellow ministers may regard them as radicals, lacking in balance, and very likely they are. But in the present situation, they are among the most valuable servants of the church. The working men see that there is at least a minority in the church that champions their cause, and that fact helps to keep their judgment in hopeful suspense about the church at large. Men who are just as one-sided in favor of capitalism pass as sane and conservative men. If the capitalist class have their court chaplains, it is only fair that the army of labor should have its army chaplains who administer the the consolations of religion to militant labor. Thus the church has a tremendous stake in the social crisis. It may try to maintain an attitude of neutrality, but neither side will permit it. If it is quiescent, it thereby throws its influence on the side of things as they are, and the class which aspires to a fitter place in the organization of society will feel the great spiritual force of the church as a dead weight against it. If it loses the loyalty and trust of the working class, it loses the very class in which it originated, to which its founders belong, and which has lifted it to power. If it becomes a religion of the upper classes, it condemns itself to a slow and comfortable death. Protestantism, from the outset, entered into an intimate alliance with the intelligence and wealth of the city population. As the cities grew in importance since the Reformation, as commerce overshadowed agriculture, and as the business class crowded the feudal aristocracy out of its leading position since the French Revolution, Protestantism throve with the class which had espoused it. It lifted its class, and its class lifted it. On the other hand, the Anabaptist movement in Germany, which propagated within the lower classes, was crushed with the class that bore its banner. If the present class struggle of the wage workers is successful, and they become the dominant class of the future, any religious ideas and institutions which they now embrace in the heat of their struggle will rise to power with them, and any institution on which they turn their back is likely to find itself in the cold. The parable of the wise and foolish virgins holds of entire nations and institutions as well as of individuals. I'm putting a link into a whole playlist, really. Dorothy Sayers, a great Christian thinker, friend of C.S. Lewis, writing around 1940 at the outset of World War II. Sayers had a lot to say a generation after Rauschenbusch wrote this about the ignorance and the indifference and the bitterness of English working class, and she was very outspoken about it in a book called Creed or Chaos. So we've done that entire book in this playlist that I'll put on your screen, and I'll also put the first entry of that playlist on your screen.